Welcome to this partner briefing. My name is David Carter and I'm the Science and Safety Practice Lead for Cumbria. So Science and Safety was created by Andrew Turnell, who is a brief solution focused therapist from Western Australia, and Steve Edwards, who is a child protection social worker from Western Australia. And they collaborated back in the early 90s because social work at that time was discussing many of the challenges we face even today. Families were saying that they didn't feel in control of their own plans and their own lives, that it was very much a paternalistic approach to practice, where social workers would view themselves as experts and then go and tell families essentially what they needed to do with their lives rather than working collaboratively alongside them to come up with solutions in their own lives in terms of their own plans. So what Andrew Turnell did was trained 150 frontline social work practitioners in brief solution focused therapy. We know that brief solution focused therapy is an evidence-based model to very quickly move somebody from a place of vulnerability, if you like, to a place of healing relatively quickly. So what they did was adopted this approach within the Science and Safety practice methodology, trained the 150 frontline practitioners, and then they went out and started practicing in this way. What families were saying at that time was that they felt listened to, that they experienced a shift in power imbalance, they felt more in charge of their own lives, and that they were listened to and heard and understood. So it was very much around the principles of practice and thinking and approaching and working with children and families in a different way up until where we are today. Some time on, and Science and Safety is one of the leading child protection frameworks internationally, and it's growing more and more, certainly within the UK each month. So more and more authorities are adopting Science of Safety as their practice approach across the UK. So as part of our practice cultural shift in Cumbria, we're adopting the principles of Science of Safety, which are use of language, simple, child and family friendly language, and it's a relationship based model. So everything we do is about relationships with children and families, and relationships with one another as professionals, and relationships with ourselves in terms of our ability to slow down and reflect on our practice. We practice the stance of humility about what we think we know, and we ask the right questions to dig down to the detail in the families' lives that we're working with. Everyone's worth doing business with, and we maintain a belief in change. Change is always possible, and we maintain that mindset when working within our practice model. We use a skillful use of authority. Yes, Science of Safety does talk about the strengths because we're trying to create strengths and replicate those strengths and evolve those into safety. We still have the difficult conversations about the things that we're worried about, but what we're trying to do is grow safety out of the strengths that are present, the exceptions to the worries that we have. So we use this skillful use of authority where, yes, we talk about the difficult stuff and we have clear statements around that, but then we shift our focus onto building and growing strengths into safety. Because all families have strengths and some may have struggles, and this is natural in terms of the work that we do. And we always search for details and focus on creating small change. Obviously, the more changes that need to take place, the smaller those steps will be. So it's realistic in terms of our planning, very much in line with the smart planning approach. And we focus on goals. Andrew Turnell says there, it's a long day on a golf course when you don't know where the hole is. So we ask ourselves, do we know what it will look like when we achieve safety, well-being or success? Do families and networks know what it'll look like when we achieve safety, well-being or success? So what we do in the beginning is define what that goal looks like, not how we'll get there. That comes as part of the solution focus planning with families. However, it gives a vision of what it will look like when we get there. So we know that we've reached the point of safety, well-being or success, and then we can move the case on, close the case, or wherever that case needs to go following that point. So Science and Safety therefore is more than a set of practice tools. It's about a set of practice principles about how we think about practice and how we approach practice in our conversations, in our planning with children and families, how we interact with the families in terms of the language, and how we shift power imbalance. Science and Safety moves away from a paternalistic approach where we present and plan for families. We actually work collaboratively with children and families and plan alongside them to coach them to safety, increase safety, wellbeing and success within their own resource and network. And it's thinking about how we put children and families in charge of their own lives, but how we communicate that in a clear, compassionate and solution focused way. Genograms are a bottom line in Cumbria, and they must be done with all families subject to a child and family assessment, and they must be taken to an ICPC. Remember what we said about signs of safety being having the bottom lines, and a network being one of those bottom lines. We need to start talking about who's in the family and who's in the network at the earliest opportunity. And we're not just talking about blood relatives, we're talking about friendships, we're talking about friends in the community, people in universal services, people in clubs, people at schools, whoever's important to that family. We're thinking much further afield than just direct blood relatives, because we know when working with children and families, sometimes those immediate relationships are quite fragmented or quite difficult, and actually some of the people best placed to support with safety planning might not necessarily blood relatives, it might be friends, it might be people in the wider network. But completing the genogram with the family introduces the importance of identifying the networks, because it's critical in the safety planning as mentioned. And there's a co-production of the genogram or the family map, because it places families as the experts of their own situation. And like an eco map, it talks about the quality of these relationships as well. Sometimes where there are challenges with relationships, sometimes relationships are fragmented, sometimes relationships are really strong. But we start talking about the quality of these relationships, and children and families are experts in these, because they live these relationships on a day-to-day basis. And then the significant people to the parents and children should be included if they can offer something to help keep the children safe. So sometimes it's around re-establishing some distant network members, or trying to strengthen some difficult relationships within families and networks, because these are the people that will be able to hopefully offer something in terms of the safety planning, in terms of the support of the parents, in terms of the support of the children, whether that's practical support, taking to appointments or helping with shopping or something, for example, or whether it's safety and protection in terms of direct care of that child. So moving on to mapping, this is how we gather our information in signs of safety and start to analyse that. We jump straight into analysis and try to understand what the behaviours mean and the information means that we're mapping. So we use initial mappings at the hub, and we use mapping in the social work teams when we're having meetings, in supervision, when we're talking to our colleagues, when we're talking to other professionals. It's really drawing all that information together into the 3 columns mapping. And we use lots of mapping with parents and carers and networks and children as well. It's absolutely right to involve them in mapping, because the information that we're talking about, or the information that we're gathering, is about them. Now we can start applying analysis to that, but we need to understand what the parent or the carers or the child's perspective is on that information, so that really lends itself to the analysis about what it actually means. So they should be fully informed or fully invested in the mapping from the onset, because it's information about them, and they're going to have lots and lots of more information that we're not aware of at that point in different perspectives. It's really important in this process. And it's not just listing information into 3 separate columns, it's focusing on the 7 analysis categories, and not just listing what we're worried about, what's working well and what needs to happen, just information. It doesn't mean anything at that point. It's when you apply these 7 analysis categories that it turns into an assessment, that it really gets down to the root causes of some of these behaviour, and then starts offering solutions about how we might overcome some of these behaviours or move past the barriers that we're experiencing. So you can see there, this is the mapping with the past harm, future danger and complicating factors in what we're worried about. And as mentioned, we have existing strengths and safety and protection in the middle column, and then what needs to happen is the safety goals and next steps. And then you'll see at the bottom there, there's the scaling. This is a scaling how far along the continuum we are from the starting point to where we want to be, what we want to achieve, or which will be the end point. And it's asking people to give a number for that, but to also give a rationale for that number. A number is very one-dimensional. When somebody gives a number, it doesn't really tell us anything. It's just a number. We need to start asking really kind of clear, focused questions around the rationale for that number, the reasons why they've scaled at that number, because in reality, people will scale different numbers at different times based on their experience, based on their understanding, based on their role, based on who they are.
And that's okay, that's totally expected. However, we need to understand the rationale, the reasoning for that number. So the scaling or the number given is only the start of a conversation. It's the start of a solution-focused conversation around change. So we need to ask some really quite sharp questions around the scale that people give it or the number that people give it. So here we have the structure for a danger statement. It says Mary the social worker is worried about some of the things that have been happening at home that have made Katie and Charlotte feel frightened. There have been times when Mark and Debbie have argued and shouted at one another, and sometimes this has become really serious where Mark has hurt Debbie and they've thrown things at one another. PC Jeffries visited the home on Saturday 12th of May because Mark and Debbie had been arguing. Debbie had thrown a book at Mark and Mark had pushed Debbie's face and scratched her on the jaw. PC Jeffries told us that Katie and Charlotte were hiding in the dining room under the table and crying because they were so frightened. Mary is worried that if Mark and Debbie cannot find a good way to work things out without shouting and hurting one another, then Katie and Charlotte will carry on getting frightened. This will mean that they will feel worried, afraid and unsafe at home. If they feel this way, this can affect their schoolwork, friendships with other people and the relationships they have with people as they grow up. So you can see there in the arrow at the bottom, that's the formula, if you like, for a danger statement. We say who is worried in the red, what behaviours we're worried about in the green, linking it to evidence in the blue, like the time when, and then the most important in the purple is what the impact is on the child. So you can see there that that's written in clear, accessible language that everybody understands. And for those of you who've never seen this statement before, hopefully you can really understand who's worried, what the behaviours are that they're worried about. You understand the evidence of that behaviour when we talk about PC Jeffries and what he'd seen. And then most importantly, you understand what the impact is. So that's a full rounded statement, which we call the danger statements, and that's our starting point. That's the very reason we're involved with the children and the families. So then we have our safety goals, which links directly to the danger statement. For each danger statement we have a safety goal, and it's what you'll be seeing if you are no longer concerned. So it's the possible end game and the possible time frame. It'll describe what will be happening and who will be doing what and for how long. We could try and talk about the time in a safety goal, because we know that if we talked earlier on about shifting goalposts or families switching off if they don't understand where they're going and what that looks like. We try and create the vision of what it will look like when we're no longer worried and for how long that needs to be maintained in order for us to close a case or to move the case on or step it down, whatever the case may be. We honour progress wherever possible. If something's good, say it's good. Celebrate that that's good. Beware of getting into telling. The safety goal isn't a list of things that we're going to tell the family to do in order to for us to no longer be worried. We're not telling them what they need to do. We're just creating a vision of what it will look like when they've done what they need to do, if that makes sense. And it's not a list of services people must attend or engage with. Safety goals aren't a list of services. We don't measure success through the compliance in services, because we know that parents will sometimes go to a service once, twice, 3 times, but the behaviour hasn't changed. So we don't measure success through the compliance in services, and a safety goal isn't a list of services. It's behavioural specific, so it's more measurable, and it avoids worries around disguised compliance. And then for each danger statement and safety goal, we have a safety scale, and that helps us to measure our distance or a journey travel between the danger statement and the safety goal, or the starting point and the end point. And the safety scale is the network's judgment about the level of safety. It's a measurable tool that helps us to focus our judgment and analyse what we need to do to move up the scale. So when somebody gives us a score, whatever the score may be, then we start asking questions about that score, the rationale for that score. A number on its own doesn't mean anything. It's only the starting point of a conversation. There is no wrong number. Different people will interpret information differently. However, whatever the number is, then we start having solution-focused conversations around what would it take to move one score up the scale. What would a 10 look like? What are the barriers to moving up the scale? Who do you need to help you move up the scale, etc., etc. This helps us to really focus our questions on and our planning on solutions and what people need to help them to move up the scale towards the safety goal. The scaling is easy to interpret due to the numbering, so that the child, the family and the network are able to give their own score on the scale, but this gives us an idea of where they view themselves. As mentioned, there's no wrong scale, and it's quite normal for a parent or a carer to scale differently to us, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong and we're right. It just means that they view the situation differently. But the number that they give will give us a unique opportunity to really start digging down to the rationale why they scale themselves at that number, and what is it they see that potentially we don't see or that we don't know, or what do we potentially see that they don't see, etc., etc. But it's only ever the starting point of a conversation, the number. So it's the conversation that surrounds the number that's more important than the number itself. Scales are not linked to thresholds. For example, number 1 to 3 doesn't mean child protection conference, numbers 4 to 6 doesn't mean child in need, and so on and so forth. Scaling questions or the number that's given subjective, so we know that parents will scale possibly an 8 sometimes, and that a social worker might score a 2, or a school might score a 4, or the police might score a 1. Whatever the case may be, nobody's wrong. And what that number certainly doesn't mean is there's a particular threshold that's applied. Then it's only ever the starting point of a conversation that opens and unlocks more information based on the skillful use of questioning after the number is given. Time does need to be invested with parents and carers and networks, all levels of intervention across the service, right the way through early help, preventative services, into social care, in part with partners, with health. Signs of safety, the practice approach relies on networks. It relies on strengthening family networks in line with Think Family, in line with thriving communities. It's about this systemic thinking. It's about restoring families, restoring communities, etc., etc. We need to be having these type of conversations at the earliest opportunity, because these are the people that can potentially provide sustainable change in the long term. These are the people that the parents and carers and the children are telling us are important to them, so they need to be brought into the planning at the earliest opportunity. We do need to consider the impact of shame, guilt and denial. There's some very powerful emotions that are involved in establishing networks. What Steve DeShazer talks about is that families will often bring forward what people might view as resistances, but what he says is that it's actually unique and a unique opportunity to start discovering or start exploring some of the unique characteristics with the families and some of the challenges with the friendships and stuff. So again, that lends itself to our assessment, because we start understanding some of the family dynamics and some of the thought processes and some of the challenges that they've had in terms of the relationships. And it's very telling, these conversations around family dynamics. If we think about in an eco map, we're talking about the people that are around, not necessarily blood relatives, but friendships, and then start talking about the quality of relationships. And we can have some very useful conversations around those quality relationships to help us think about the best people to be in the network. Because parents and carers and children are the experts of the relationships and their experiences of these. We might not agree with these sometimes, however they are the expert of the relationships and how they experience them and how they value these relationships. And network members do not always need to provide direct care of a child. We used to traditionally ask very few questions, but more directed on who can provide direct care of a child. A network member doesn't even need to come into contact with a child. An example of that would be is that mum has a friend that lives 100 miles away, and the children don't ever see this person. However, it's an old school friend, but mum rings this person on a Friday night to let off steam, to kind of share some of her challenges and stresses of the week. That person still has a function in the safety plan, but doesn't necessarily come into contact with a child. If we'd asked a question, who can help you care for the child, that person may have never come up. The value of that person and what support they could provide might have never came up because we've asked the wrong question. So we're asking questions that are a lot broader than that, that's not necessarily about direct care of the child, but that somebody that could provide support or somebody that's meaningful in whatever context. And we use ears in signs of safety as a method of questioning, if you like. You'll see there the E is the elicit, which is asking the question. The amplification is asking lots of behavioural detail about that question. The reflection is what that means. So we've asked the question, we know all the behavioural detail, the who, what, where and when, and then we start reflecting and applying analysis, what that means, that behaviour, what does it mean for the family, what does it mean for the parents, carers, children, network, etc. And then we start over. We can ask a different question on the same subject or a different question on a different subject, whatever the case may be. They aren't rigid, these questions, and they're not a script that you use. You design unique questions for the unique set of circumstances for each family that we're working with. So actually there's a lot about preparation and designing the right questions in signs of safety. And you'll see there, and I shan't read these all out, but there's a table there that shows this elicit, amplification, reflection and starting over, the process that we can work through when we're talking about worries, the process when we're talking about strengths, and then the process when we're talking about goals. You can use this EARS process, questioning in any form really. So when we're mapping, when we're having conversations with parents or with children, we can have when we're conversations with one another. This process is really useful, so we're not just asking a question and getting an answer and then forming a hypothesis or a judgment based on that. What we're doing is asking a question and then finding out lots and lots of detail about that to give the full broadest picture. Then we're reflecting to understand what it means and start applying analysis, and then we're starting over again. So there's a cycle to asking these questions, and these questions, as mentioned, take place over time. The questioning in the assessment isn't an event that happens in the beginning. We continue asking questions over time. And we use solution-focused questions, so we use a lot of relationship questions in signs of safety. Andrew Turnell talks about relationships being 70% of the questions we ask in signs of safety, because it allows us to see the situation from another person's perspective. Exception questions are very important. This is focusing on when the times when we could have been worried, or the times when the problem was present but we weren't because of what happened or what the parents did or what they didn't do. So there's exceptions to the worries, if that makes sense, because that can unlock some of our understanding about how we can safety plan if we know what the exceptions are and we can replicate that in the future. Impact questions is what they say. It's about the impact, tells us the impact of a situation. And coping questions are really important, thinking about those parents and carers that are really struggling, that things have been really difficult and challenging for them, and it's helping them to understand about times when they have coped in the past and what was that about, who was there to help them, how did they help them cope. Miracle questions is about what good enough will look like. Goal formulation questions is about helping the client or the person that we're working with think about their goal in relation to the worries. What's their personal goal? What's the goals for the families? What's the goal for a week's time? What's the goal for 3 weeks' time, a year's time, whatever the case may be. But it's always working towards something, because if we're not working towards something, if we're not working towards a goal, we're not working towards anything. We're static. Scaling questions. Scaling questions gives an individual interpretation of the worries and promotes conversations around change, and we've discussed scaling questions already, but this is us measuring how far along we are in the journey or how far along we are in the scenario, whatever the case may be. So moving on to direct work with children, Andrew Tennell says that children often feel like pawns in people's games, and what he means by that is that traditionally in social work practice there was all these things going on around children, but they didn't ultimately understand what was going on or who these people were, what the purpose of it was. And this can be very anxiety provoking for children. It must be quite difficult for them, for all these strange adults to be in and out of the house, and all these different meetings and possibly even court scenarios, etc., and legal people speaking to them. It must be quite anxiety provoking for children. So what he's suggesting is that there's a way we need to be ensuring that we're communicating with children in a way that they thoroughly understand who we are, what we're worried about, what the situation is, and what's going to happen. So it's creating a bit of a vision for them in terms of what will happen in their future. So this alleviates some of this anxiety and alleviates some of this misunderstanding. And My Three Houses is the main tool, if you like, within Signs of Safety to record a child's voice, because the child's voice is critical in casework. The child's voice should be visible to the parents, the carers and the network, because it informs all our planning and should in fact lead all the planning. The child's voice is key, is central to all of our planning. The My Three Houses is a recording tool. It's the conversation that counts. We can do My Three chocolate bars, My Three helicopters, whatever the case may be. The method of recording isn't as important as the questions that we're asking and the preparation in terms of completing that work. So if we go out with a piece of paper with My Three Houses and then start asking the child what they're worried about and what they think's good and what they think's not good, etc., etc., we're potentially not going to get the right answers. We need to be really thinking about what the specific worries are in relation to the danger statements and thinking about the safety goal and starting designing questions around that, unique questions for each individual child or young person. And then, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, as a bottom line, we have a words and pictures explanation, and this is the parent's explanation to their child about why we're involved. So you can see there this is a two-way process. So in the middle we have the issues or the worries there. So we have the danger statements and the safety goals and safety scales, so that around the issues and the worries. But you can see there the My Three Houses is on the left is the child's explanation to their parent, their experience of what it's like living at home, how they feel and what their voice is and what their experiences are. And you can see there on the right is the words and pictures is the parent's explanation to the child why we're involved. And it's explaining to the child in child-friendly language that they can access and understand the reasons why these social workers are coming to my home, what it is that they're worried about and what they're working towards, what the future's going to look like in terms of developing planning to keep this child safe and to help them to feel safe. It's a shared story, so we develop it with the parents and other important adults, and the social worker supports them to explain the concerns to the child. If the children are to be involved in safety planning, they need to understand why there is a need for that plan. And it's not okay for parents to say that they don't need to know this information. They do. We don't want to traumatise children, so we say it in child-friendly language. However, children need to understand who these people are that are in their lives, because we don't want children to feel anxious or not understand or take on any kind of ownership about these worries that we have. We need to clearly describe who the people are, what's the purpose of them being there, and what we're hoping to achieve, what we're working towards, so we can alleviate some of these anxieties for children so they can thoroughly understand the reasons why we're involved. It provides a foundation for healing. It's a therapeutic process, and Words and Pictures were developed alongside Signs of Safety with Susie Essex from the NSPCC, who's done some fantastic work, but has offered Words and Pictures as a way to communicate with children and families around some of these difficult issues. Helps the parents in the network process the past by connecting their experience to the problems of the children, what the children need to know. Enables professionals to have a better understanding and greater compassion of the parents' experience. Because sometimes, again, we talked about making judgments, it's helpful for us to really understand from the parents' perspective what their experience has been about some of these challenges, and helps us to have more compassion for that. And it reinforces the relationship between the family and the worker, enabling greater trust and openness to flourish. We're having these very brave, open discussions, very brave conversations with families around the issues. We spoke earlier on about this skillful use of authority. There needs to be time when we need to talk about the tough stuff, and the parents and carers need to be aware of this when we begin to work with them. We say we really celebrate everything that you're doing well and really acknowledge all those difficult times, but you've overcome them successfully. But there will be times when we need to have these difficult conversations and talk about the tough stuff. But that's absolutely right when we're working in a child protection conference, to celebrate the successes, to celebrate the strengths, but really focusing in and have the conversations around the tough stuff when it's necessary. It's designed to deal with the silencing, secrecy and mixed messages and confusion that surrounds child abuse, because it's in a very clear, accessible story. And it's often not telling children why we're worried, saying it's an adult concern. We spoke about this, about actually it's not an adult concern. If something impacts on a child and is their world, then it is their concern because it affects them. So these aren't just adult concerns that we talk about. We're discussing them in child-friendly language, adult themes in child-friendly language that they can understand, they can make sense of their world. Andrew Tennell talks about Words and Pictures being 50% of the safety planning, which it absolutely is, because unless a child understands who we are and what we're worried about and what the impact is and the reasons for that, then how will they know what safety looks like, and how can we start having those conversations around safety, and how will they know what's okay and what's not okay, and how will they understand some of the rules that we're trying to put in place to manage this. So it is 50% of the safety planning, which is why it's a bottom line in Signs of Safety. Beatrice, the social worker, had been worried about things at home. Sometimes Jenny and Bobby did not see Dad for a long time. This was because he was in prison. One time they went to live with Uncle Paul and Auntie Claire because Mum went to prison too. Jenny and Bobby missed Mum and Dad when they were away. This must have felt very sad and scary for them. Prison is a place where grown-ups go when they break an important rule called the law. The law is a rule that tells us how people should and should not behave. It is wrong to break the law, and if the police and the judges and the court find out, people can get into trouble. They might even go to prison for what they've done. One of the reasons Mum and Dad went to prison before was because they took things from shops without paying for them. This is called shoplifting. Shoplifting is wrong, and the people that do it are breaking the law. And you can see there in the picture, there's a picture of the judge making a statement about the law, and then the police officer there waving his fist, telling the parents to stop shoplifting because they're breaking the law. So thinking about a safety plan, it's a specific set of rules and arrangements that describe how the family will go about their everyday life, that shows everyone that the children will be safe in the future. And that's thinking about the whole day and all the different scenarios and situations that could potentially be triggering or cause red flag worries. So thinking about right the way from waking up in the morning through breakfast times, getting dressed, going to school, coming home from school, clubs, trigger points throughout that, and times when we've been worried about the behaviour, and acknowledging what those are and having rules around managing that situation, because there will be difficult situations, will be challenges, as we've mentioned. So we have a specific set of rules and arrangements about how that safety plan, how those parents and carers in the network are going to manage those difficult times. And it's what needs to happen for everyone to be satisfied that the child will be safe in their own family. All families bar none have challenges, some more than others. That's human nature, that's just the world that we live in. But it's about how they successfully overcome those challenges with the support of the right people at the right time within their network, who's going to do what, where and when on a daily basis to keep these children safe. And it's a service plan, as mentioned, isn't a safety plan. Services don't keep people safe. An example being if a parent, we know parents that go to a triple P parenting programme, for example, but then things don't change, so they go on it again and then again and then again, and nothing changes. And we have lots of reasons or excuses why this hasn't happened, but the reality is that a service doesn't necessarily keep a parent safe. If they're not invested in that change, if they don't have a belief in the value of the change, then they're not invested in it, and they've potentially just been told to go to that course. They don't really understand the value of that, and they don't necessarily even want to be there. If a parent or carer goes to some kind of service because they've solely themselves identified that it might be useful, that they need extra help with that, then they're already invested at that point. And if that behaviour changes or improves or regulates as a result thereof, then actually that has been useful. But what isn't useful is giving a big list of services for families to comply with, and then they comply with them, and then we're still worried and nothing changes. We need to be really focusing on the behavioural aspect, what the changes in behaviour will look like. The parents, carers and network will come up with the solutions about how they're going to achieve that. It is an expectations agreement rebranded, so we've done away with expectations agreements. They don't exist in Cumbria anymore. Because all that was a list of rules that we'd hand to a parent or a carer to sign in the heat of the moment, ask them to sign it, and then it kind of reassures us that everything's going to be okay, but it doesn't, because that's again only a moment in time. And the reality is, if somebody gave me an expectations agreement or a list of rules that I'll comply with and asked me to sign it in a difficult situation where anxieties are high, I would feel quite frustrated about that, and I'd be inclined to not want to do it. And when that person left, I may not completely dismiss what they've asked me to do because I'm not invested in that. This hasn't come from me. Safety planning comes from the family, comes from the network. It's solutions that they've come up with to manage their own situation. It's not what we've imposed on them, because expectations agreement do not equal safety. A safety plan is a journey created in a relationship and demonstrated over time. So it is a journey from the danger statement to the safety goal, and we'll measure and test this over time. There will be some aspects of the safety plan and the rules that the family and the network have come up with that will be hugely successful. It completely alleviates our worries in a particular area, and that's measured and tested over time, and that becomes embedded in the long-term plan. However, there will be rules that they put in place that doesn't quite manage a scenario, and again, that's okay, but that helps us to come back and refocus our efforts and start asking different questions around that and adjusting the rule so it actually evolves and it changes over time. And we test these rules over time, so the ones that have worked really successfully and been measured and tested remain. The ones that don't, we change and revise and review those until they become a rule that actually everyone can work with and does ensure safety that's measured and tested over time. So eventually we'll come up with the final safety plan, and this will be the plan that the family, the parents, carers network and the children will carry forward once the case is close to social care. And the skill for the worker lies in the coaching the family to build safety rather than imposing a to-do list. We've all seen in the past. Remember, the how signs of safety came around was around this feeling of this paternalistic approach and us imposing our rules and our views on people, and there's kind of power imbalance. We're very much shifting away from that. So we're not giving families a to-do list and telling them what to do. We're asking them the right therapeutic solution focused questions to unlock their potential, to unlock their understanding, so they start bringing forward and coming up with the solutions. And all safety plans should consider a network, as we'd mentioned, and these are the people that are important to the parents and the children, and what those people will do on a day-to-day basis to ensure safety, to support the parents, to ensure safety, to help the children to feel safe. There'll be an agreement on signs that the parents or the caregivers are struggling, and what the network will do in these instances. So we'll talk about triggers and red flags. We talk about situations that trigger behaviours, and we talk about red flags when times when the behaviour is happening. And we need to understand these, because the difficult times will come. In the real world, difficult times do come, and we need to manage these as best as we can. So there'll be rules around during these difficult times. This is what this person's going to do to make sure we navigate these difficult times, and we'll come through the other side, and the children haven't been affected and haven't been exposed to any difficult behaviours. There's agreement on people, events and situations that the families and the parents need to avoid. So we're thinking about different situations that could be triggering, different situations that were very difficult to manage, and we maybe need to think about a different solution there. But it's useful in safety plans to think about all of those situations and think about those that potentially happen in the future, because again, they're only there for a moment in time. But we know as children grow older, there's going to be other challenges as they grow up, and other thinking about contextual safeguarding and other scenarios and other situations that we may need to kind of have a think about. Because if we're talking about a long-term sustainable plan, isn't it right to be talking about these things that could potentially come up in the future, depending on the age and stage of development of the child or young person? There's clear rules and actions which will keep all the things we're worried about from happening tonight. So that's immediate safety. So we talked about services earlier on, where we're worried about particular behaviours, so we'll put a referral in. However, a referral may take 4 to 6 weeks to be actioned, to be picked up, if you like. That doesn't ensure safety and protection of that child tonight. So it talks about, from the here and now, from this moment forward, what are the rules going to be. We need to get straight into this creating the immediate safety plan, the initial safety plan, but then that's developed and measured and tested over time, and on that journey we kind of measure and test all the rules that the family have put in place, and then that evolves into the finalised safety plan, which will be carried forward once the family are close to social care. If professional services are involved, what exactly is their role, and what will it be in enhancing and promoting safety? Parents and carers are able to manage the safety and protection of their children without necessarily putting lots and lots of services in place. We know this. We know we've worked with families before where there's a dozen services, for example, working with them, but we're still worried. But then we know that there's other families with equally as worrying behaviour, but with one service involved, and they're managing that. There's something around how parents and carers are managing their lives and asking the right questions and what solutions they're coming up with. We don't automatically have to, based on our hypothesis and based on our view, start referring to lots of services. That very much needs to, and as much as possible, needs to come from the parents, the carers and the children and the network. It's not about what support we're imposing on people, it's about what support they think they need and feel they need, and they're asking for, that they've identified that they would not like more information or more support or more education in a particular area. So we don't automatically refer to lots of services that don't necessarily equal safety. We start asking questions to the family about what they think is important, what they think they need, because irrespective of services, they can manage safety if the right safety plan is in place and they have a network around them to help them manage that. And remembering, we don't think that safety plans fail, some just aren't rigorous enough yet. Just because the safety plan doesn't work, as previously mentioned, that's okay. It just means that we need to ask different questions, we need to have different rules, we need to test out different rules that the network have come up with. Just because a safety plan hasn't worked after a point. It had been working for a while and it hasn't worked at a particular point. We don't completely abandon it and rip it up and start again, because actually there may still be lots of positive aspects to that safety plan, lots of positive aspects to some of the rules that we have. It may just need adjusting in a particular area, because whenever problems arise, we need to get the parents and the network back together to sharpen their plan. They're responsible for their plan because it's their plan. So we need to get them back around the table. We try and resist imposing all our rules again and putting sanctions in place and escalating, etc., etc. We bring them all back together and sort of have a look at what didn't work, why didn't it work, what could we do differently, what could they do, what could we do, what could the network do, etc., etc. It's supporting them to sharpen their own plan. And always consider if escalation through statutory process is the only option. Again, moving through statutory processes, although it's a legal requirement based on threshold, etc., doesn't necessarily, again, equal safety, because a plan is a plan is a plan. If a plan's good and it's robust and it has the right rules and the family network are working it, it will work irrespective of what level of the service that it's at. We need to escalate through statutory process if that's the right thing to do, if we have a statutory obligation. However, we need to understand that that won't necessarily improve or change or regulate any behaviours. It's just our statutory process. The actual change is going to be unlocked when we go back to the parents, carers network and the child and start asking lots more questions and doing lots more planning. That's where we're going to facilitate the change, not necessarily through our statutory processes.
The Signs of Safety Practice Development team offer regular introductory training via Microsoft Office Teams, which you are available to book on by contacting the Signs of Safety team on signsofsafety@cumbria.gov.uk.